I'm Max Davey and welcome to my second video about child development and games, focusing on the areas where child development can be a bit more tricky. So today we're going to talk about social interaction. Now, if you spend time around people, you will find that they don't make sense. Most social interactions are governed by rules that are not written down, that don't actually fit together, and which you couldn't actually write down even if you had the time to do it because they don't make sense. And most of us navigate this and get by with a mixture of habit, educated guesswork, experience, and what we would call instinct, but is really just a combination of the other three. But some people, this kind of educated guesswork is very, very difficult or impossible. And the difference between those people and the rest of us is really how stressful they find social interactions and how many different social interactions they find stressful. Because for most of us, I would say, unstructured social interaction is to some degree stressful. If you think about a stand-up drinks party, talking to lots of people you don't know, for most of us that is stressful. Some of us enjoy it. For me, I'll pass. But if you have a situation where things are stressful, then two things will help. One is a supportive other person, in this case an adult, and the other is structure. And so for people who find interaction difficult, games can be a really good alternative because they fit this bill. But I think we need to remember how much expectations we have of children when we get them to sit down for a game. They have to understand the kind of magic circle and expectations of the game space. You have to understand winning and losing graciously, acceptable behaviour at the table, and sometimes a kind of subtle definite distinctions between acceptable and unacceptable deception in certain games. So with all of that, it's not surprising that children can find the multiplayer games quite tricky. And so actually my first very simple tip, if you have a child who struggles with social interaction, but you think games might be a helpful thing for them, is to play two-player. And I think over and above that, it's useful to choose games where it's more of a points race, a race for a certain number of points, rather than a one-to-one victory, I beat you. So to that end, I've got a few suggestions for younger children and adults actually. Kokoro is a very sweet game which you can play at different levels, and it's a sort of roll and write, drawing roads, which has got a really tactile feel as well, and plays just as well with 2 as with 8. Barren Park has been feted all over the place. It's a wonderful game that just makes me happy, and not much less happy when I've lost as when I've won, because what you've basically done is build a bear park, and who doesn't love building a bear park? And I've got Oh My Goods for the sort of slightly older child, and the advantage of Oh My Goods is that it's very, very cheap. You're both building up a little engine, a little kind of economy, and the interaction between the two of you, it does play with more, but it's best with 2. The interaction is not very strong, and so it doesn't feel bad when you're beaten at the end. But there are a couple of games that I do think have an interesting feel that is worth considering as well. One is either Rhino Hero, or what I've got here, Rhino Hero Super Battle, because even though one of you wins and one of you loses, there's that feeling you're building a tower as time goes on, and actually there's a kind of cooperative feeling about that until it falls down and one of you loses. And that for younger children, 6 up, is tremendous. Either version, and of course the smaller version is much cheaper. But the last thing I just want to mention is Hero Realms, or its allied game, Star Realms. Yes, these are games where you win or lose, but the theme is so appealing, particularly to older children, perhaps who find social interaction difficulty and kind of like to escape into this kind of fantasy or science fiction worlds. And the mechanism of deck building is also one that's very appealing to people who want to kind of build themselves up and like a little bit of repetition in their games. So I think that's a winner actually, and I'll come back to it later. So what about cooperative games? The obvious thing is if somebody's finding the stress of interaction and interplay difficult is to do a co-op game. But I have a word of caution about that, because actually in cooperative games you are trying to negotiate your own agenda and other people's agenda into a shared agenda. And that's another situation where there are these unwritten rules which are very hard to guess and to go along with. And so actually I found pure cooperative games need a little bit more structure. The model actually I wanted to adopt here is like a very common and popular therapy called Lego therapy, where essentially there's a picture of a model given. One person has the instructions for how to build it, another person has the bricks, and a third person actually puts the model together without looking at either of the instructions or having direct access to the bricks. And so it's both cooperative but also highly structured. And I think cooperative games that have something of that structure are really, really helpful as well. Incidentally, there are games which are quite closely modelled on Lego therapy, but I don't think they're in print, so I'm not going to mention them. Forbidden Desert, you each have a role. Forbidden Island is the other version, so this is for slightly older children, around 8 and up, I would say. Harry Potter, Hogwarts Battle is obviously, lots of kids love Harry Potter, and certainly what's nice about this is for younger children, you've got the first couple of years of Hogwarts, which are very, very simple, basic deck building. So again, that deck building, having your own cards and building things up is really appealing. And then Flashpoint Fire Rescue, which again has got various levels of difficulty, and it's just really, really good fun to play with kids. But again, particularly if you play the slightly more advanced version where you have your own roles, then you have that feeling of, this is my job, I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to stick to it. And sometimes that is, you can be too rigid about it, but you have to take the rough with the smooth, of course. Of course, sometimes you have more than one child, and you have lots of children who want to play a game. So you want a multiplayer game which is not kind of cutthroat, which allows competition but without kind of upset. Now, the ideal would be a family-friendly one versus many game. For me, I think that would be great. So for instance, if I was the one and a number of children were the many, that is actually a really good way of playing. Now, I've tinkered with making stuff like this, but actually I've never been able to find a good one versus many family-friendly version. Scotland Yard would be the closest, but I'm not sure that's a fantastic game. You can do it with Hero Realms, although Hero Realms is a bit gory to be family friendly, but there are boss decks that you can buy where I would be like the dragon or the zombie lord or whatever, and all the kids could come and try and fight me. That works pretty well actually as a card game. So again, another plus point for Hero Realms there. But what if you do have to do a multiplayer game and because you've got lots of kids to accommodate? Well, again, I would go for the ones where it's less about knocking other people down generally, and more the ones about building something and see who's built best. So not unrelated to Baron Park, which I've put under 2-player because it plays so well with 2 players, but the other thing is King Domino, which plays brilliantly with 2, 3 or 4. I've played it with 4-year-olds, 5, 6-year-olds. It says 8+ on the box, but it is a tremendous game, and I think it's essential for anyone's collection. You can play Ticket to Ride, particularly if you tweak the rules to make them less in your face, so allow some of the exceptions to having double routes and so forth, and just kind of give a bit more game space. Then actually it's not particularly in your face, and it remains a classic. I'm getting slightly overwhelmed, aren't I? Downforce is an interesting one because on the one hand it is a race game, and is also therefore very appealing to particularly younger boys. On the other hand, even if you lose the race and lose the race badly, you can still win the game by betting on the winner and by betting on people who have come first. And so that can be very, very helpful as a way of winning in lots of different ways. And finally, now this is one I almost always end up recommending, King of Tokyo. Now, this is a conflict-heavy fighting game, and you're fighting over Tokyo and you're trying to smash each other. But the genius thing about this game that I haven't seen that many other places is when you attack someone, you have no choice over who to attack. If you're in Tokyo, you attack everyone else. If you're out of Tokyo, you attack the guy in Tokyo. So it's never personal. So if you want to introduce somebody to conflict who's been a bit conflict averse, this is a fantastic one to start with. And you can see how much wear our copy has had since we bought it maybe 6 years ago. Fantastic game. So I've tried to go for games which are easy to get hold of, not too expensive and accessible, you can spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds on games in the hope that you'll find something that really clicks with your child. And I think it is worth mentioning that it's worth trying a few things out. Borrow from friends, go to a games cafe, and just try stuff out, because actually you never really know what's going to really click with someone. And the other thing that I want to go back to once again is my sort of 2 rules of family gaming. 1, if you're sitting down, playing a game, having fun with your kids, you're doing them good. And the second is, if you're not having fun, stop playing.